Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, and today we're going to say some beautiful stories, and everybody loves a story, but these aren't just, again, fairy tales. We're talking about true stories, and it's from the book Wonders and Miracles. This is from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, as his picture is here, as you could see. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe was in 770 Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, passed away in 1994. Buried in Queens Montefiore Cemetery, but people still by the thousands literally go to his gravesite for blessing. But we're going to tell stories about when the Rebbe was living and they actually performed miracles. So without further ado, let's roll on. No one could do anything. One child had died and his friend was seriously injured. The tragedy threw the entire city into a state of shock. Everybody was talking about it. The students of Eina Karai School in Rishon LeZion city in Israel had trouble grasping the enormity of the tragedy. In a few short minutes, their friend had been killed and many others injured. That very day, the father of the boy who had been seriously injured contacted Rabbi Gruzman, the local emissary of the Rebbe. "My son is in critical condition, Rabbi. The doctors don't give him much of a chance. I don't believe in miracles and tzaddikim, these righteous people, and mezuzahs that people hang on the doors for protection and all those things. But my wife asked that you come and check the mezuzahs in our home." Rabbi Gruzman readily agreed to the mother's request and hurried over to check the mezuzahs. It turned out that two of them were written on paper. That really they're supposed to be written on parchment, not paper. On the mother's instruction, the mezuzahs were immediately changed. A few days later, Rabbi Gruzman went to the hospital to see how the boy was doing. At the entrance to the intensive care unit, where the boy was still unconscious, he encountered the boy's father. The father expressed his appreciation that Rabbi Gruzman had found the time to come and visit. He was touched that the rabbi was so affected by the boy's predicament, but the situation was unfortunately hopeless. Rabbi Gruzman was not to be deterred. He had arrived with a drink from the Rebbe's cup, and he asked the father permission to enter the boy's room and feed him a few drops of the liquid. "You can't imagine what these few drops can do for him," he urged. "And you can't imagine my son's condition," the father responded. "The doctors have told us that our child is brain dead. He only has a few hours to live. I am happy that you want to help us, but nothing can be done." Rabbi Gruzman was insistent. "Just try my suggestion. Maybe it will help. You say you don't have any other hope, so why not just try this?" The father was hesitant. "What will the doctor say about this drink?" The rabbi's insistence finally overpowered the father's doubts. "I don't believe in these things," he said, "but if you really think that it might help and it will make you feel better to try, I consent. If a miracle by some chance occurred," he said with a slight hint of hope, "I promise to fast even on Yom Kippur." The rabbi stole into the boy's room and poured a few drops of the liquid down his throat. The change in the boy's condition was quite sudden. Within a few hours, the condition improved significantly. The surprised doctors informed the parents that the critical stage had passed. They were now sure that normal treatment could be administered. Their joy at expressing the miracle of their son's recovery cannot be described. Rabbi Gruzman soon lost contact with the family and was not informed about the final outcome. A short time ago, however, the boy's father called the Chabad House and asked to speak with the rabbi. "Although we have not kept in touch," he began, "you should know that I take pains to fast every Yom Kippur as I promised. My son's bar mitzvah is coming up, and I would be honored if you would attend the simcha, the celebration." The bar mitzvah party was large and impressive. With great emotion, the father got up and told the story to the guests. "You can't believe how great is the power of the Rebbe of Lubavitch," he concluded. "Even a few drops from his cup can do wonders." All right, this is a story from Rabbi Ben-Zion Grossman. This story took place about 4 years ago when I was in New York, he goes on to say. "One day I happened to be in Borough Park, a place in Brooklyn, on some personal matters. Early in the afternoon, I hailed a taxi and asked the driver to take me to Crown Heights. I wanted to get there in time to daven mincha with the Rebbe. Davening was due to begin, as it did every day, at 3:15. I left Borough Park about 2:30, hoping to arrive at 770, the headquarters of Lubavitch, 770 Eastern Parkway, with at least 10 minutes to spare to properly prepare for davening, for the prayers. I began talking to the taxi driver in English, then I recognized his distinct Israeli accent. We quickly switched to Hebrew. I asked him if he ever merited to see the Rebbe. His response surprised me. I was a bit disappointed with the Rebbe, he said. Now, in my line of work, I meet a wide spectrum of Jews from all corners of the world, but this was the first time I heard any Jew say such a thing. I decided to feel him out and find out why he had a complaint against the Rebbe. A number of years ago, the driver began, I came to the United States to make some money. I searched everywhere for work until one morning I found myself in Borough Park. There I noticed an advertisement on a shul bulletin board, looking for Jews who are interested in working for a group of home decorators under strictly Orthodox management. I decided to apply for the job. Indeed, the company was run by a person who keeps Shabbos, a fine, upstanding person. Naturally, most of the work that came our way was for religious Jews throughout the New York area. We would frequently do jobs in the homes of different other Rebbe leaders of Hasidic sects and Rosh Yeshivas, which are the head of the different rabbinical academies. And I saw many of their fine and even magnificent homes. I remember being so impressed by the beauty and extravagance of one home of one Jewish leader. It was explained to me that this was all in keeping with what is written in the Gemara, the Talmud, that a fine home expands a person's spirit. Certainly must be true for such beautiful homes as these. One day the manager instructed me to go to Crown Heights to the home of the Lubavitcher Rebbe to fix some windows and make various other household repairs. I was filled with strong emotions. To work in the Lubavitcher Rebbe's own home is no small matter. On the way, I imagined how the Rebbe's palace would look. I drove as fast as I could to get to the Rebbe's house as quickly as possible. I arrived at President Street and parked in front of the Rebbe's home. I rang the doorbell, the door opened, I entered the house. I couldn't believe my eyes, I was stunned. Is this the home of the Lubavitcher Rebbe? I asked. I had received a shock in my life. The house was furnished simply. There wasn't even any modern appliances. I did my work, thinking that at least perhaps I would catch a glimpse of the Rebbe. But here too I was disappointed. I did not merit to see the Rebbe while I was there. I left the house in a somber mode, and for several days I found myself quite depressed, until I managed to put aside the whole incident. I saw how disappointed the man was that he had not seen the Rebbe. I told him that at that very moment the Rebbe was about to leave for Mincha, the afternoon prayers. Perhaps he would now get his chance to see the Rebbe. The man was overjoyed, but it was not to be. The driver took a right instead of a left at an intersection. He was driving quickly, and soon we were on a highway going in the wrong direction. I was already too late when we realized his mistake. I looked at my watch. We would probably arrive about 4:15, an hour after the Rebbe normally left for their afternoon services. You see, the man said, I missed my chance again. I will never see the Rebbe of Lubavitch. I tried to calm him down. I explained that he could attend the afternoon and evening services at the 770 Eastern Parkway any day of the week and see the Rebbe, but he was not convinced. You see, I had the opportunity, but it slipped away from me. We finally arrived at the shul at the synagogue at 4:15. As I left the taxi and took out my wallet to pay the driver, I considered paying him extra since the journey had taken longer than expected, and it may have been my fault. My conversation may have caused him to lose his concentration and take the wrong turn. I hoped that paying him an extra few dollars would sweeten the pill. While I was counting out the money, I saw a group of boys standing around the entrance to the shul, the synagogue. I went up to one of them and asked him what was going on. I don't know what happened, the boy said. Usually the Rebbe goes to the afternoon service at 3:15, but today for some reason he was delayed. He still has not come out. We expect him any minute now. I ran to the driver and told him the Rebbe had not come out yet. He would still get his chance to see the Rebbe and daven with him. You see, I told him as we ran towards 770, the Rebbe is waiting especially for you. As soon as we walked in and took a place in the shul, the door opened and out walked the Rebbe. After davening, the man was extremely excited. I am sure that the Rebbe came out late today because of me. The Rebbe did not want to disappoint me a second time. The Rebbe's expression will remain forever engraved on my memory. All right, keep on rolling. These are beautiful stories how the Rebbe's in tune with every person. I was happily married with 2 lovely children. Then tragedy struck and I was left alone. Eventually I recovered and remarried Yochi, my secretary, in the Eged office where I worked. Our first daughter was born recently. There could be no happier day for me and my wife than the day our daughter was born. After all the pain, it was incredible to be able to start all over again and set up a family. Now this is a story here that, this is a story from Yossi Hochman, a 44-year-old Eged. That's the name of the bus, like you'd say the CDTA in Albany. Eged is the name of the bus company in Israel, who lost his wife, his 2 children, and his legs when Arab terrorists commandeered a bus traveling along the road from Haifa to Tel Aviv. But now he's remarried. Yossi had married 40-year-old Yochi 4.5 years earlier. They had tried to bring children into the world without success. Yossi Hochman came from a kibbutz, Yochi from a traditional home. After trying everything, they finally arranged a private meeting with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Yossi received 5 blessings from the Rebbe and a photograph of their meeting. 2 months earlier, Yochi became pregnant. Hochman is now a Baal Tshuva, a person returned to Judaism. He has not begun to observe mitzvahs yet, but he admits, I am a believing Jew, and the Rebbe's blessing was fulfilled. Yossi and Yochi knew that the baby would be a girl, and they decided to name her Uriah. The meaning of the name is light from God in Hebrew. This describes my feeling towards her. He says with his round, smiling face. Many of his friends and family members had expected him to name the baby after one of his lost loved ones. But Yossi did not want to tie his daughter to the past. For him, the birth of his daughter closed the circle that was opened on that fateful day when he took his family for the trip, which ended in tragedy on the coastal road. Yossi prepared to tell the story of his recovery again and again. In fact, he constantly makes the rounds of hospitals in Israel, trying to give encouragement to other seriously wounded patients. He believes in this form of therapy with all his heart. These are the mitzvahs, the commandments that I do perform, he says. Yossi prefers to keep his deep feelings about the birth of his daughter to himself. And I am generally an open person. Although the story of my rehabilitation is already known to thousands of people, but I prefer to keep my feelings about my daughter to myself. My story is not common, Yossi continues. I was a normal citizen who worked hard to support his family. One bright day, I lost my wife, my children, and my 2 legs. I need both physical and mental rehabilitation. My daughter symbolizes my desire to go back to what I once was. She returns me to my past. 12 years after joining Agate as the director of the company's sports department, Yossi retired. He had left the kibbutz years earlier and built a beautiful villa for himself, an athlete. One of his most basic beliefs is that any person who suffered great tragedy, just as he has, must return as soon as he can to a normal life. A year after I was wounded, I began to walk on my artificial legs. Before the tragedy, I was a sportsman. I found it extremely difficult to adjust to the fact that there were certain things I would simply never be able to do again. But I didn't withdraw into myself. I was always surrounded by friends. Yossi heaped words of praise on his wife, who he believes deserves a gold medal for her struggles to conceive. The courage that she showed is an integral part of our relationship, which has become stronger and stronger through the years. All right, keep on rolling, one miracle after another. Keep it rolling. In the year of 1950, a young man by the name of Shlomo Blazer was faced with being drafted by the American Army. This was no small matter. In those days, it was simply impossible to observe the commandments in the Army. He had a friend who convinced him to arrange a private audience with the Rebbe. The Rebbe sent him off with a blessing without speaking about his problem in any way. His friend, who was waiting outside the Rebbe's office, understood that something was not right. He explained that if one meets with the Rebbe without having made the proper preparations, the result will probably not be satisfactory. Shlomo decided to arrange another appointment, but this time he came prepared. He studied a Hasidic discourse, prayed with great concentration, and a few days later once again found himself facing the Rebbe. "Have you ever suffered from heart disease?" the Rebbe asked him. "Well, yes, I recall once having a heart problem," the young man suddenly remembered. "And what about your blood pressure?" Yes, there was something. The Rebbe asked him many questions concerning his medical health and history, but he was not satisfied with the answers until he began questioning him about his dental record. When the man responded that he had never had any dental problems, the Rebbe explained, "If so, that will be the way." During his next meeting at the draft board, he complained about pains in his teeth, and he was immediately discharged. When they told the story to the Rebbe said, "This is interesting. My father-in-law, may rest in peace, never performed a wonder by any means that could not be explained away naturally. But since that young man had doubts, I wanted to show him how things could be arranged in a completely unnatural way." Even though you try to do miracles in a normal way, you try to, and once in a way, you got really wild miracles. This story took place during the month of Iyar, which is around the springtime in 1980. I had received specific instructions from the Rebbe to arrange the dinner in the United States on behalf of Chabad institutions in Kiryat Gat. Talked about that earlier. It's a city in Israel. He agreed that I travel to New York together with my family to prepare for the gala event. This was to be the first dinner held on behalf of these institutions. Many of my friends, among them Hasidim, strongly advised me not to hold the dinner in the U.S. They warned me that I would be lucky just to cover my expenses. But the Rebbe himself instructed me in the clearest possible terms that I was to complete the preparations and hold the dinner on schedule. The dinner was held at the beginning of the month of Tammuz, in more the summer months, at the Hilton Hotel in New York. Thank God it was a greater success than we would have ever dreamed. A few weeks before the dinner, I wrote the Rebbe asking how I should plan the coming months. Should I remain in the States until the end of the summer and then return to the land of Israel, or should I stay near 770 Eastern Parkway for the high holidays? In my letter, I described my options. My work in New York would take most of the summer, so there was little chance of returning before then. Since the high holidays would begin soon afterwards, and that year was the year of Hakel, when an ingathering of all the Jews every 7 years, it doesn't seem logical to return to the land of Israel with my family. Jews from all over the world would be streaming to 770 to see the face of the Holy Rebbe. On the other hand, if we'd stay from Shavuos until after the high holidays, we would not be in Kiryat Gat in our city for the start of the school year. I therefore asked the Rebbe for his advice. What should I do, and when should I return to Israel? The Rebbe's answer arrived soon. Go ahead before the beginning of the school year. When we received the Rebbe's answer, we understood that we would return to the land of Israel before the start of the year, meaning around Rosh Chodesh, around September. As the date of our departure came closer, our friends began arriving from all over the world, and the special atmosphere of the month of mercy and repentance began to be felt in Lubavitch. The thought of returning to Israel, especially before the Hakel celebration, began to seem a bit strange. When my friends saw that I was preparing to return home, they were amazed. Whole families, men, women, and children, are flocking to 770, even if they have no place to stay for a month. They are sacrificing their comfort to be here for the month of the Tishrei, the high holidays, and you, who are all settled and comfortable here, plan to return to Israel? Of course, I simply explained to my puzzled friend that I was simply carrying out the instructions the Rebbe had given me at the beginning of the summer. Then the so-called Rebbe's interpreters began to offer all sorts of explanations. After all, the Rebbe did not explicitly write that I should return to Israel. All he had written was, go ahead, which could mean that I should continue making plans to return to Israel before the start of the school year. It could also mean that if it was too difficult to return by then, I could go ahead and implement my second plan and remain here. Little by little, I began to see how the Rebbe's words could be interpreted in different ways. At the start of the month of Elul, which is September, I found myself composing another letter to the Rebbe. In that letter, I asked permission to remain in the Holy Courtyard at 770 Eastern Parkway for the holy month of Tishrei, the high holidays. I emphasized that my absence from this Kiryat Gat city in Israel would not distract from the smooth opening of the school year. I never received an answer to that letter, but I convinced myself that I had been granted permission to remain in 770 until the end of the month of Tishrei. For Chayil, the 18th day of Elul, I traveled to California for a meeting concerning Chabad institution there. My friend from Kfar Chabad accompanied me. We traveled by car from Crown Heights to San Francisco and then to Los Angeles. We encountered a terrible heat wave on the way to LA, and the journey in a non-air conditioned car was extremely difficult. We spent the trip discussing words of Torah relevant to the month of Elul, repentance and regret for one's sins. I mentioned a parable I had once heard from the Rebbe about a person who went down to bathe in the river and suddenly felt as if he was drowning. As much as he tried, he could not keep his head above the water. When he realized that all his efforts to save himself were futile and his end was near, a thought suddenly came into his head. Why did I ever go into this raging current? This is true regret for one's past actions. When I finished the parable, I remarked that the depth of the person's regret in the parable is difficult to feel. At midnight, after many hours of exhausting travel, we arrived in Los Angeles and rented a room in a small motel. Since we were very uncomfortable from the heat of the journey, we decided to take a midnight dip in the motel swimming pool. We looked around and saw there was no people in sight. We took off our outer clothes and jumped in. At once, for no apparent reason, I began to lose consciousness. It lasted less than a minute, but when it was over, I was so weak I could not lift my head out of the water to breathe. I hope my friend would understand. Excuse me. I hope my friend would understand my plight, but he had no idea what was happening to me. He did not even approach me. I struggled with all my might to tread water with no success. I began to swallow water and felt that this was it. My sins had caused this decree. I thought about my family and the Rebbe's interest and my city, how divine providence had placed in my hand responsibility for such holy endeavors. What would be? Divine providence would find new messengers. It is hard to believe that all these thoughts could have passed through the head of a person during such critical moments, but only one who has, God forbid, had such an experience can understand. When it was clear to me that I was about to pass on to the world that is only good, a thought entered my mind. At least now I had experienced the Rebbe's parable about the drowning man who regretted that he had entered the raging waters. Just as I was about to lose consciousness, I imagined the Rebbe's face and decided to go above, straight to the previous Rebbe's. While I was deep in these thoughts, a strong hand grabbed me and pulled me to the surface. My head came out of the water, I sucked in a breath of fresh air, and then sunk below the surface again. This happened a few times until my friend finally succeeded in pulling me out of the water. I was in bad shape, but thank God alive. When I recovered from this harrowing experience and rested up a bit, we concluded our affairs in Los Angeles and 2 days later returned to New York. I was still deeply affected by almost drowning. The days of judgment, the 10 days of repentance, and Yom Kippur passed, and we were full of hope that God had inscribed us for a good year. I was sure that my experience, which I kept secret from my friends, was an atonement for my sins. On the 13th of Tishrei, the Yortzeit, the anniversary of passing away of the 4th Lubavitcher Rebbe, I was driving to 770 in a car I had rented from Hertz. At the intersection of President Street and Brooklyn Avenue, a policeman stopped me and asked for my papers. After checking through them, he asked me to accompany him to the station. It seemed that the car I was driving was stolen. I showed him my Hertz rental agreement. He could not explain what had happened, but insisted that the police computer showed that my car had been stolen from the Hertz company. He had to assume, he explained, that the driver of the car was the thief. After filling out forms at the local station, I was taken in a police vehicle to the central station for serious crimes. My fingerprints were taken and more forms filled out. I was handcuffed, and in the afternoon I was told that I was to be taken to jail to await arraignment before the judge. I begged the policeman to allow me to phone the 770 for them to bring my towels and to fill in my prayer things, and miracle of miracles, they agreed. Since my hands were chained by the handcuffs, I gave them the phone number. I asked that the rabbi be brought to the phone. I asked him to find my tallis and tefillin and come to the Brooklyn courthouse. I gave them the address of the courthouse they were supposed to take me to that afternoon. After the telephone call, I tried to speak to the policeman's heart, explaining that I had been arrested for no reason, but he was adamant. This is something for the judge to decide. In the meantime, they brought me to my cell. Needless to say, I was the only Jew there. In fact, I was the only white person there. What cannot be described are the criminals, 25 in all, with whom I had the honor of sharing a cell. Those 3 hours seemed to last an eternity. Later, we were taken to a closed van, which was pitch dark inside. We traveled for about 20 minutes and entered a dark underground parking lot. We were let out of the van in a straight line and marched to a cell under heavy police guard. This cell was in the basement of a courtroom. We were told that a lawyer would soon arrive and we would all have the right to his assistance in presenting our cases before the judge. When we arrived in the new cell, I asked to see the warden. After much pleading, an officer arrived, and I told him somewhere in the building there was a friend who had brought me my tallis and tefillin, my prayer things. I was a rabbi, I explained, and was obliged to pray. I insisted that he honored the right of every citizen to practice religion his own way. But the officer was not convinced. I started to scream, which brought in the chief officer. He acted with more respect and sent a policeman to find my friend. With the mercy of God, the policeman succeeded in tracking him down, and when I saw my tefillin, my eyes lit up. My tefillin bag was handed over for security inspection, then brought to me in my cell. I explained to the chief officer that I couldn't pray in a room full of these wild people, and asked his permission to enter one of the adjoining offices to pray there. Once again, the officer responded to my request. He appointed an armed guard to watch me. I wrapped myself with my phylacteries, and then that evening my turn to face the judge finally arrived. But first I was called into the lawyer's room. I began to explain my strange predicament. Without any reason, due to some terrible computer mistake, no doubt, I was suspected of car theft. The lawyer heard my story in utter amazement. The minute I saw you, I knew that you had no business being in a place like this. I will try to figure out what's going on. A half hour later, I was called into the judge. The lawyer had already done his investigation and tracked down the cause of the technical error. He and the judge apologized for being imprisoned in error. With so little goodwill on the part of the policeman in the local station, it could have all been avoided. They asked for forgiveness from me, a tourist and a rabbi, in the name of the United States of America. They told me to go home and return in a few days, for the official papers exonerating me of all wrongdoing. Well, there you go. That wonders and miracles you deal with the Rebbe, and only good things happen. And, unfortunately, if people don't listen, then certain things happen, and then they run to me, to the rabbi, to help them out. In any case, we should only go for blessings and miracles for all of us, miracles from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And thank you again for watching The Jewish View.